I'm working on a video right now, but have to re-record a lot of it, unfortunately, so it's going to take a little while to get that out. But while I was working on it, I had a question come up. What happens to gods when they die in WoW? The Prime Nera Zera is thought to be dead, but tells the player that she is on the astral plane, whatever that means. And then we revive her with the Tears of Elune. When Y'Shaarj dies, he curses the land in his blood and haunting manifestations of his essence linger. And through his heart overgrowing Garrosh, he might reincarnate in some form if successful. Sargeras cuts down the Titans and stows away their souls to break them and corrupt them to the Legion. He is successful, at least with Angramar. Enor hides his soul away on Lunaria, where we recover it and take it to the seat of the Pantheon, where she recovers her corporeal form. The Pantheon of Death are advanced, powerful automata with highly powerful souls. Denathrius can be disembodied and absorbed into his sword, and Zavoth's soul is presumably destroyed since we kill him in the place of his origin in Zereth Mortis. So there is no place for him to be recalled like demons, voidlings, mortals, or Enor. And this will be in the next video, and was in the Freya video, but I think that Lunaria is the homeworld of Enor. The Akir and Faceless Ones return to Ny'alotha when they die. Dragons go to a quarter of the Emerald Dream called Gunnar, the Mother Tree. But Elune chooses to send Ysera to Ardenweald for rebirth, intentionally. This is a deliberate act. Wild gods also go to Ardenweald to hibernate and be reborn. But there's 3 specific deaths I'm interested in that have made me make this video. 1. The Old Gods. 2. The World Soul slain by Sargeras. And 3. Deathwing. First, the Old Gods were created according to Chronicles by the Voidlords tearing off pieces of themselves and hurling them out into the universe, where they would eventually, by pure RNG, find planets with world souls to take hold of. Even after death, the Old Gods' taint and corruption persists in many forms, their rotting bodies and spilled blood still tainting the ground. Originally, Blizzard said we didn't canonically kill the Old Gods, but that we beat a piece of them, knocking them back down, weakened into their prisons. But then Blizzard retconned this, saying Cthulhu, Yogg-Saron, and Y'Shaarj are actually totally dead. But then I wonder, where do they go if they're totally dead? Because if they return to the Voidlords that reformed them, then I think that's a serious problem. They take with them tons of intel about our world and the forces they've witnessed, and whatever power they've absorbed so far from feeding on the World Soul, potentially bringing all of that back to their creator. But even if those aren't true, it must be a power-up for the Voidlord to get a piece of their body or soul back. So then whatever master or masters that created them may be growing in power and knowledge with the defeat of each old god. But what about Inzoth and Goon? Goon is an artificial old god created by the Titans. Does he just cease to exist? Does he share a soul of multiple old gods? I don't think the writers will explore Goon in the future again, but it is an interesting thought experiment. And Inzoth? See, I have never thought Inzoth was actually dead. He sees the future. He sees the true timeline when we travel back to the Black Empire during Dragonflight, so he would know that we were going to defeat him in Ny'alotha. I suppose Ny'alotha may exist out of time in its own contained reality, but he would at least know that he would try and fail to succeed in this gambit in BFA. Don't think Inzoth was ever truly free of his prison. Remember that everyone, including the other old gods and cultists, tell us that he sleeps at the bottom of the ocean like Cthulhu? Inzoth is not in a physical prison, I think, but instead trapped mentally or spiritually within Ny'alotha. Ny'alotha is Inzoth's dream of the world, and his goal in 8.3 is to tear down the veil separating Ny'alotha and our reality, so that Ny'alotha will become the real one. Why would he do that and open veil assaults around Azeroth instead of just simply destroying the world? Probably because his body is free, but not his mind and soul. But I think we freed him. And I don't mean by what we did in Azura's palace necessarily. A gambit in chess is where you make a sacrifice with an opening move for an advantage later in the game. When Xal'atath takes us to Inzoth, they make a deal. Xal'atath is freed from the blade, but Inzoth says the blade must stay to serve me. The blade then finds its way into Nathanos' hands, who appears to maybe use it as a compass in a cutscene fleeing from the Alliance Navy before the Tidestone is used to bring the heart of Azeroth to Zinashari, or as you know it, Nash'Atar. No longer possessed by Xal'atath, the blade seeks to return to Inzoth across land and sea and even time and space. Because when we go to Ny'alotha, Wrathion is given the blade. In the fight with the Carapace, it seems as though Inzoth will win, but Wrathion grips the blade and lunges forward, stabbing Inzoth in the head with it. Inzoth exclaims in excruciating agony, writhing, his eyes looking around in many directions. The assumedly inert blade glows and pulses with blue energy never seen before as a property of it. An explosion of shadows sends Rathian back, and Araki emerges from the carapace to defend it against further attacks. I should note here in lore, the Faceless and Akir are creatures that were born from their bodies of the old gods, emerging from their blood and orifices, as gross as that sounds. So what happened to the blade? If it could once hold Xal'atath, could it hold Inzoth's soul? Only time will tell, but since this cinematic release, I've been convinced some fragment of Inzoth dwells within the blade. The Faceless Naraki Hulk may even be the body left over after a portion of Inzoth's soul was consumed by the blade. Or at least to have a mastermind villain capable of seeing many outcomes with plots spanning eons that also knows the true timeline, not being able to find out a branching path to escape his own death would be a massive blunder by the writers. I also think it's just kind of in character for Inzoth to do this. So basically what I'm suggesting here is that Inzoth intentionally wanted to keep the blade and have it travel to him over time. And we see that happen. It goes from Crucible of Storms, finds its way all the way to Nazjatar, and then all the way to Ny'alotha, and then all the way to him where he's stabbed with it. Now, I think it's foreshadowing, or it should have been foreshadowing, that he would say, the blade will remain to serve me, right? And then he would be stabbed with that blade. Now, he says it serves him, which is like a curious addition to me, because besides maybe leading the Thanos to Nazjatar, I just can't, it didn't do anything in service of him, right? So, in fact, the only thing it was used for was to stab him. So it's like, if that was what he wanted the blade for, then of course he would keep it, right? I know this sounds maybe like I'm trying to find meaning here to say he's not dead, but either the writing makes no sense or maybe cut content, or I don't know. Like, he says the blade will remain to serve me, and then it travels all the way to Ny'alotha where it stabs him in the head. So explain that to me if it doesn't sound like the blade is serving him. Unless that was the intended purpose, in which case, you know, that's why I think that this was all a part of his plan. Because, I mean, where is he after we free him? He's in Ny'alotha. He's not running around the world like Deathwing, smashing cities and stuff. He's in Ny'alotha trying to break down the veil to get to us, right? So that's why I think that he's within the blade. The entire plan was he'll go for this Ny'alotha play, but if that doesn't work out, the timeline where it doesn't work out is where we stab him with the blade, so his soul, or a fragment of his soul, is kept within the blade, and then the blade escapes Ny'alotha, and so he's free. Bam! Nailed it. Alright, moving on. Alright, next of course, there's the world soul slain by Sargeras. The Titans manage to seal their essence in an act of desperation which Sargeras collects over time to torture and break, as he did his student Angramar. It seems as though death cleansed Angramar of his corruption as he fights alongside us against Argus, and even his line when defeated is, it may be too late to start Sargeras. But what about world souls? Argus had not awakened, and we fought an incomplete version of him which had been pumped full of death magic by the Nathrezim to accelerate the rebirth of Legion demons. We are fighting his world soul and not the full-blown Titan he would be. The Titans absorb his powers and use it, combined with their own, to imprison Sargeras within the seat of the Pantheon. So I speculate this is implying a portion of his soul continues to be used to fuel the seat of the Pantheon as a prison, like it had previously been used to regenerate demons, but this is only speculation by me. The player characters may also possess his weapon as it drops after battle, and I hope, like many Legion artifacts, it might prove one day to be an intelligent item capable of thinking, though I imagine it would only want for souls in despair. When he dies, his massive soul travels to the Shadowlands, destroying the Arbiter, causing the Shadowlands drought. Curiously, we would encounter an echo of his soul and defeat it, but not in the places you would expect. Instead, it's within the crypt of the Eternals within Zereth Mortis. I hope to make a lore video about Zereth Mortis one day, because this location is highly significant in lore, and so is learning the afterlife for a Death Titan is here within the Zereth installation. See, within Zereth Mortis, the first ones created the automata bodies of the Pantheon of Death, and then took them to this structure called the Crypt of the Eternal Ones, where they breathed life into them, giving them souls. The prototype Pantheon in the raid is stated to lack powerful souls, and so are just very powerful automata without free thinking. It was within the crypt that they gained sentience, and the first ones told them their charge and left them one final edict, that they shall never return to Zereth Mortis. Curiously though, the first ones gave each a sigil that combined would open the way. Why would they do that? It will probably never be explained, as it contradicts their stated desire for the Pantheon of Death to leave and never return. Anyway, Argus' soul coming to this place where the Pantheon of Death was given life and sentience and brought into existence is very interesting, especially that Nathurzim in this quest then attempt to bind his soul to an eternal prototype examining now Argus will be eternal. A part of this quest is that Sargeras, a esteemed automata carrying out the will of the first ones, says we must create a new arbiter and that there is a soul slumbering in the crypt that must be used to do so. Now, I'm going to put a pin in that real quick, just side tangent. It doesn't in there. Dragonflight gave us reworked uldaman, and inside there is a journal called Edicts of Prime Designate, volume 742. It is a transcript of Odyn's edicts. It basically details a propaganda mission by the keepers to lead mortals to be beholden to the Titans and see them as the creator of all. His third edict tells us much more. Quote, "Do not share knowledge of the first ones. Mortals cannot conceive of the wonders the Makers granted to the Titans in Zereth Ordis. Thus, learning of the progenitors would only confuse them. It is enough that mortals know that the Titans brought order to the cosmos and that they are owed deference." End quote. Let's go back to what I was saying before. So then, with these two things in mind, is it not possible that if slain, the souls of the Titans would return to Zereth Ordis and be printed out as new worlds to be reborn? I think this theory might give explanation to why Sargeras did not simply attempt to consume their souls, or was particularly concerned with breaking them to turn them to the Dark Pantheon along with him, Angramar, and Argus. That is what Argus said was his plans, and Angramar describes the Dark Pantheon, and that it is the purpose of the Coven of Shivara. The Coven's purpose is to torture the souls of the other Titans, to break them and bend them to the will of the Legion, and that is what they are doing to the Titan souls Sargeras has managed to capture. He broke Argus and Angramar. But what I think is if he simply killed them, their souls might return to Zereth Ordis. This leads me to theorize that this is why Argus broke the Arbiter. The Arbiter is an automata without a soul carrying out its directives with the powers and sigil taken from Zaval. It would have been created in Zereth Mortis by the rest of the Pantheon of Death. The prototype Pantheon entry in the Dungeon Journal says, without a soul, the prototypes only carry out their directives in a robotic way without expression or higher order reasoning skills. So, if the Pantheon of Death is forbidden inherently from going to Zereth Mortis, but the Arbiter is programmed to return to Pantheon of Death members, or even to send Argus there to be reborn in a new automata body, then it is stuck in a paradox. It must send Argus to Zereth Mortis, but it is forbidden from doing so. I imagine this is also a reason the Pantheon of Death didn't simply kill Zaval, and instead chose to imprison him. Whether Zaval got the sigils and forced his way there, or they killed him sending his soul there to take another body, Zaval wins. It is also why I think that Zaval is truly dead, because of his dying in the place he was created, and the engine for rebirth damaged from his own hubris actions. And what about Denathrius? Disembodied soul trapped within his sword? Ever since the Sepulchre raid released, I've wondered, why are the Dreadlords here helping the jailer still? Why doesn't Denathrius simply want the world soul for himself? Why are they trying to help Zaval and the universe? Well, we know that new bodies can be made for the Pantheon in Zereth Mortis, and we know that Denathrius needs a body. I think it only makes sense that the Dreadlords were helping Zaval to gain access to the prototype machine, and make him a new body. So basically, I think that the Dreadlords, what their entire purpose in Zereth Mortis was to gain access to print off Denathrius a new body. I hope that when we see Denathrius again, he gloats about it as a successful operation. It still does leave the question of why Denathrius is bent on destroying every other cosmic force by helping the Void Lords, and Zaval, and Sargeras. And add anyone else in here in their attempts to claim the world soul through his Nathurzim infiltration and manipulators. It is extremely curious to me that Denathrius wants to accelerate this process and conflict, but not claim it for himself. It makes me think that he knows something that none of us do. Having corrupted Sargeras and Argus, I wonder for what purpose, and why not take the power for himself? When we find out, I hope that you remember this video. So a malformed, immature world soul of Argus goes to the Shadowlands. Then one of the world souls Sargeras destroyed with his sword. What happened to them? Are they in Zereth Ordis? I hope that we will learn one day. And just going off script here, I kind of want to recap because I know this was a lot of stuff. So basically, in Zereth Mortis, there's a crypt where the first ones are given life, like they're given a soul. And their souls rest there until they're placed into one of these automata bodies that are printed off in the sepulcher, right? When Argus dies, his soul goes to the Shadowlands, where the arbiter is stuck in a paradox where the stricter edict it's given says it can't go to Zereth Mortis. None of the Pantheon of Death can go to Zereth Mortis. But that's the only place for Argus's soul to go. And that's why it breaks the machine. And Argus's soul does eventually end up there, as we find out. Now, one of the powerful attendants that deals with creating realms of death in Zereth Mortis, they tell us that a new arbiter needs to be made, right? So this is this attendant's job, or this automata's job, is to, keep the cycle of death going. So they need to print new afterlives, they need to print eternal ones when there's one lacking. So they've got to do all that, right? So that's what he tells us. And then he tells us that, we're just so happens there's a powerful soul in the crypt that is ready to take on this role. It's ready to take on an automata body from the sepulcher and become an eternal one like the Winter Queen or Zafal or any of them, right? And then when we get there, guess who the soul is? It's Argus, right? So I hope that makes sense. So, and then I also, from this, I infer that maybe the world souls, when Sargeras cut one in half, right? Assuming it didn't go to the void because it was apparently quite corrupted, but when Angramar dies, he's cured of his corruption, so I don't know. But what happened to the one that Sargeras cut in half with his sword? Did it go back to Zereth Ordis? Did it cease to exist? Right? Because Argus, when he dies, he goes to the Shadowlands, right? And he goes to Zereth Mortis. So when Sargeras cuts a world soul in half, does it go to Zereth Ordis? I'm just saying, okay? Alright, moving on. Finally, a burning question I've had since BFA and throughout Shadowlands and Dragonflight. Where's the soul of Deathwing? Naraki, Akir, and other minions of the old gods travel to Nyalotha and Death. They tell us all the time, and we meet some old enemies there to face again. But Deathwing can't be found here. Neither can the Nightmare Dragons. Rathian is initially corrupted, but we snap him out of it. Later we encounter Vexiona, the purest form of Deathwing's corrupted, abominable children called the Twilight Dragon Light. But she goes to Nyalotha when Enzoth summons her. She's not there because she died. In fact, there are no dragons in Nyalotha besides those from our realm that have not died yet. So then where could Deathwing be? In lore, dragons do not die and go to the Shadowlands. But instead they go to a sanctuary part of the dream attributed to Aviana called Gnar, the Mother Tree. When Avian's dragons and other flying creatures die, they are said to go to this tree and rest upon its branches. This is likely also why we do not find any other dragons besides the Sarah and Ardenweald. The drakes or dragonkin we do find in the Shadowlands are natural things that appeared there through the elements or are made from the skeletons of fallen dragons like in Maldraxxus, or evolved naturally in the case of the Veilwing and Ardenweald, which are not dragons but instead dragonkin, and legend has it that the Veilwing came into existence because the Dalaran sorcerer had a dream of a painting of a feathered dragon. Don't ask me to explain that. Even if these are dragons, they begin life here and do not come to Ardenweald from dragons dying in our world or the dream. This isn't too strange though, as we've seen elemental drakes appear elsewhere, and the elemental plane exists in a realm beyond the Shadowlands, according to the Titans. Thrallr gains his access to the elements while being tortured within the maw, and shamans readily call upon the elements and elemental enemies can be found, so dragon can evolve over time from elements. They could just be naturally occurring. Dragons, though, as we know them in our world, exclusively exist as a product of titans meddling with proto-drakes. They were forcefully evolved and elevated with special purpose given to them by the Pantheon. But their evolution is the subject of another video. The only reason that Ysera can be found here all alone is because the Lune intentionally sent her here to Ardenweald to be reborn, is not natural to the realm. When the Fae wheel the massive anima seed out, the Winter Queen scoffs in disgust and calls it Elun's pet with heavy disdain, and the consequence of Elun being reborn here instead of resting in the dream is that she is forever bound to Ardenweald, saying that she is bound to Ardenweald and its fate. Ysera acknowledges and accepts this. During the events of Dragonflight, it is arranged that someone would need to take Ysera's place for her to walk Azeroth once more, and so a soul is exchanged for a soul and she emerges once more. This deal is necessary because the Primalists had guarded the entrance to the dream through Ancient Bow and the Dragon Isles. Curiously, one of them tells us there is another way into the Emerald Dream from Ardenweald, and I assume this is through the process of rebirth. So that was the plan, to take Ysera's place in her death pact, and have her reborn into the dream to get the Primalists through the back door. This is all fun and interesting, but the point of this is to drive home the point that dragons do not go to the Shadowlands in death naturally. Even the void-corrupted ones like Deathwing or many others don't appear in Ny'alotha in death, or as a result of dying. They go to Gnar. In the case of its soul, there's no evidence that it is in Deepholm or anywhere else. Not a word or whisper or hint or anything. Nothing of his corpse or person found there, or the Abyssal Maw or anywhere else for that matter, besides his bones found with him. There is a theme that many are purified of their bodily corruption and death, like Angramar and Ysera. Many enemies will thank us for vanquishing them when we defeat them because they feel relief to finally be free from the madness or mind control. There's only 3 places Deathwing's soul could be at this point: the Elemental Plane, the Void, or Gnar. And honestly, I think it's only really truly possible for his soul to be in Gnar. If it was on the Elemental Plane or in the Void, we would have known by now, or had the faintest hint, because assuming it was still corrupted, he would never relent on his insane quest of annihilation. Like, never. We would be seeing him. And since it didn't go to Ny'alotha, I'm not compelled to think it would skip Ny'alotha and head straight to the Void. All the old gods played a role in corrupting Deathwing, but N'Zoth was the only one left alive manipulating him by the events of Cataclysm, and his corruption is often attributed directly to N'Zoth. So naturally, as a minion of N'Zoth, his soul should have traveled to Ny'alotha, but it doesn't. Deathwing is in Gnar, presumably free of his corruption. Gnar is curiously a place we've been told about for many, many expansions in alternate media going back a very long time, I think even to Vanilla. But it's not one we ever visit, which the dragons reminisce about, and besides Aviana, I do not think that any that have traveled to rest on its branches have ever returned. It is sold to us as a benevolent place for flying species to soar through the skies and rest on its branches, but if you ask me, it sounds more like the other afterlives, an inescapable prison. It does seem to me that none attempt to commune with the spirits of those found in Gnar. There's always this option for those trapped in the Vale or Shadowlands, it seems, but for those in the afterlife and the dream, there is no attempts to commune with them. The wild god who holds sway over this quarter of the dream, Aviana, welcomes the Arakoa of Draenor to rest on its branches when they die. In this way, Aviana seems to me to blur the lines between typical wild god for flying creatures and life, and Loa of Death. But it's just so strange to me that is a location built up so intensely and referenced constantly throughout many expansions of the game, but then never visited and beyond our reach. None who go there are known to come back except Aviana, who's responsible for ferrying their souls there. Will we ever see Deathwing again? I don't know. What we often get are a lot of untied loose ends, and it seems like Blizzard abandons the unpopular ones. Kind of like throwing stuff at a wall to see what sticks. So I feel like the bones of many ideas were put into the game, but most of them were just abandoned. Like, Aviana even comes up as a very significant character in Mount Hyjal and on the side of the Druids and their participation in the war against Deathwing, as well as mention more lore expansions, both there and in more Lords of Draenor and probably even Pandaria, about Gnar, but we never see it, hear about it. Like they built it up. It's they just keep bringing it up and adding more details and inhabitants to Gnar, but they don't ever expand on it. I can't help but think that maybe the importance of it, maybe is that we're supposed to have learned at some point that Deathwing went to Gnar, but it's not something that's really explained, and it's not something that any of the characters in our universe seem really concerned with at all. It's like, think about it, we've already been to the Shadowlands, we know all this different stuff about souls, anima, and all that, but nobody ever stops to think, well, what happened to Deathwing's soul, right? Or Malygos, but Malygos might be a little bit different. We do find an echo of Malygos inside quest chains in Dragonflight, but these are just like echoes of him, and It's not his soul as far as I understand. Kind of like when we find echoes of Medivh and Karazhan, or Echo of Neltharion and Aberrus. Like, Echo, I think, just implies it's like a temporal version of them that exists in a period of time that somehow, because of how powerful they were, persists in a certain space and time. If that makes sense. So it's not actually their soul, it's more like a blip in time. So then, you know, it's like, where is Deathwing? Like, okay, Zereth is in Ardenweald, and presumably everybody else went to Gnar, so was Deathwing so void corrupted he went to the void? Did he skipped entirely over Nyalotha, didn't go there? Is he in the void? Oh, no. If he was in the void, we'd know, because he would just still be causing chaos. And he probably would have came to exhaust defense in Nyalotha anyways. So, I don't know there. So it just seems extremely, or even more likely to me, that he would be in Gnar. And I'm assuming, because Ysera was cured of her corruption after she died, that Deathwing is maybe cured of his corruption too, in a spiritual form in Gnar. So to recap, what happened to the old gods, specifically Goon and Enzoth, is Enzoth and the Blade. Did the old gods, do they go back and reconstitute the Void Lords that created them? Goon is a combination of all the 4 old gods, so what happens to him? Does he, like, what, does he just go nowhere? Does he have no soul? But the world soul slain by Sargeras. What's the deal with that? Because Argus isn't even, like, we fight the world soul of Argus, we don't fight Argus himself. Like, that's very explicit. That's why we're able to defeat him, is that he's, like, immature and he's not perfectly developed, right? He's underdeveloped. He's not, you know, at his full power. He's still very powerful, but he's not at his full power. Okay, so if the planets with world souls get printed out in Zereth Ordis, and then they're out in the universe, then when they die, do they go back to Zereth Ordis? And if that's the case, are there more Titans? Like, are there... So the souls of those Titans would have been reborn in new worlds and then pushed out, right? Because that's what... If you go back to Zereth Mortis, that is what the automata there are doing. They even say, in the presence of Argus' soul, inside the crypt, that there is a soul there and we can create a new arbiter with it. What about the ones that Sargeras blew up, right? Because we know he destroyed at least one, and it's assumed that he would have destroyed more. Where are they? Who are they? What are they? You know? And, you know, the one that Sargeras destroyed, it was said that he was, or they were so far corrupted that destruction was like the only thing he could even think of. And then when Angramar finds Azeroth, it describes it similar to the world that Sargeras found, but slightly less bad. It's very similar wording. It's like the old gods cover the planet and there's a veil of shadow around it. But the one that Sargeras found, it's like even worse. It's like the entire planet is covered in flesh and the shadow is like almost impossible to pierce, and it's like just way worse. So if pumping Argus full of death magic is viable for sending him to the Shadowlands, to Zereth Mortis rather than Zereth Ordis, then does the one that was pumped full of void, shouldn't that one go to Zereth Umbra? So hopefully you get what I mean. So third, Deathwing. Where is he at? Like, Ysera was corrupted, and then in her dying moments, Elune sent her soul to Ardenweald, and she's like the only dragon from our realm to die and go to Ardenweald. So then, where is Deathwing? Is he in Gnar, Elemental Plane, the Void? Probably not the Void, because he wasn't in Nyalotha. If he was still persisting in the Void, you'd know he would be still trying to cause chaos. So to me, it's like, realistically, he can only be in Gnar. And then it's like, well, what is Gnar, and why does Blizzard continue to build up all this lore about Gnar, or just adding on details about Gnar, especially in Cataclysm, and then we never see it? It's just mind-boggling, isn't it? Alright. Thanks for watching my ramble video. I tried to stick to the script, but I just think about this stuff like all of the time.